Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Trombone Talk. I'm Josh Bledsoe, and this is Jeffrey Durbin. We are the trombonists of Presidio Brass, which is sponsored by XO Brass, or KHS America, and we are proud performers of the XO artist line of instruments. And we're here today to talk about the questions that you guys submitted through our various social media channels. We got a huge number of DMs and emails and website submissions, and we decided we would just kind of condense them into basic topics instead of addressing everybody's questions. So what do you say we get started, Geoff?
Sounds great.
So before we get started, though, I just figure I'm gonna let Geoff talk about himself, because especially as a trombonist, he's got a bit of a unique resume and a bit of a unique perspective that I think is really valuable to people who are learning the instrument.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so I guess my background is mostly as a euphoniumist or a euphonist, or whichever one you prefer. That nomenclature is a little muddled, but that's okay.
No one wants to be called either one of those things.
Anyway, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, so I picked up the trombone in high school, and I considered myself a dabbler mostly for a long time. I had very little formal training. I was just trying to get around as best I could. And then I really started to take it seriously in graduate school. I wanted to open myself up to a few more opportunities that weren't necessarily viable for euphonium players, and really started to take off while I was working on my doctoral degree, and then the opportunity to audition for Presidio Brass came up, and I practiced real hard, as we like to say, and I was offered the position. And from there, it's been kind of a rocket ship in trombone development, because I swear I'm not trying to blow smoke, Josh, but it's been a pleasure playing next to you every single day, because I've learned a lot just by watching you play. So yeah, I know, right? He did not pay me to say that. I will not see a paycheck as a result of that comment, but it's sincere. Anyway.
I know that I thought that perspective of coming from the euphonium would be very valuable, because I think for me, you know, I started life my instrumental life as a trombonist. So there's a lot of things a lot of perspective that I don't even have, because it just always has been that way. It's something I never really thought about. Why do I want my tongue to work like this? It does, because the instrument has been my voice, since sixth grade. So, cool, awesome. Well,
If I
talking
may,
about
the interesting thing, probably one of the biggest culture shocks for me as far as the doubler goes, is that it's like the timing is all the more apparent, or at least the focus on timing. The air, the tongue, the lips, and the slide all have to be unified, and that's not exclusive to the trombone, but it's easier to do that incorrectly on the trombone. If
yeah,
if your slide's slow, you're going to hear it. If my finger's a little slow, you might hear it, but you won't hear it as readily as you'll hear a late slide on the trombone. And that's been one of the biggest culture shocks for me, as I've been trying to again elevate my trombone playing up to the level as my training on the euphonium.
yeah, totally. So, I mean, I guess we can start jumping into the one thing that makes the trombone so unique, and that's slide technique. And I know anybody who's been looking at our Instagram got a peek into your training on slide technique recently, right? Laying on the bed
Oh,
and was
yeah,
that
totally.
it? Yeah.
I realized at a certain point that I was mostly pushing from between these two fingers, and that's really what led to that idea that if I'm going to work I'm sorry, let me kind of amend this. It's always when you're working on slide technique, if you talk to 10 different trombone players, you might get 10 different approaches. I and we can edit this out if we want to, but I have been saying lately that trombonists agree on technique as often as politicians agree on healthcare. Everyone's got their opinion, everyone has their priorities, and that's what I have found to be the case. But most people will agree that you're going to push from the thumb, and that is when the trombone slide is moving outwards, you're going to push from this spot, and then you're going to pull from your fingers inwards. um, the weight of the instrument, everything supportive is going to happen over here so that this is free to move as it needs to. But what I was finding, after some really close analysis, is that I was actually pushing from my middle finger and I was kind of guiding it along the slide, which adds a lot of tension on the slide, and it was actually slowing me down. So when it came time to play really fast, I wasn't equipped to do that. So yeah, so what I have taken to do is, at least for a few minutes a day, I'll lie on my bed or I'll lie on the edge so that the part of the trombone that comes over my shoulder isn't inhibited or anything like that. But I will spend some time letting go with these fingers, and I'll push with the thumb just slowly at first. I don't want to do it too fast because I don't have my fingers to block, so I don't want to like launch my slide up at the
Sure.
ceiling, especially not with my pristine exo brass trombone. But I want to make sure that I push with the thumb all the time, and that it's relaxed, it's directed, and then I'll try and do the same thing in a normal playing position, and I'll try and do it quickly. I'll try and make sure that what I'm doing is very free and uninhibited, because with that will come your speed.
So what are your kind of basic tenets for slide technique coming from, you know, the euphonium? You've obviously got like in your brain things that you think about to make sure that,
Mhm.
you know, this is good slide technique. What kinds of things for you are you thinking about as these are the pillars of great slide technique?
I guess, well, what comes to mind first is this idea that you leave as late as possible, but you still arrive on time, right? So like, I I try and I try and subdivide as much as possible, right? So, and the idea is if you're subdividing in your head as 16th notes or even 32nd notes, and you don't leave until that last subdivision has happened, and then you try and still get there on time. Um, that to me has been very helpful. So what I'll do a lot of is I'll play scales, a lot of scales. Scales really help with technique, especially on trombone. Um, I'll articulate 4/16 notes, and I will force myself to not move the slide until that 4/16 note has been articulated. And I will still try and make sure I don't get any sort of zap or smear moving to the next position. A lot of careful attention to chromatic scales helps. Or you can even say one day, I'm just going to work on my whole steps. So I'm going to go 1 to 3, 1 to 3, working on that. Tongue in 16th, and then 2 to 4, same thing. Push with the thumb, pull with the fingers, push with the thumb, pull with the fingers. Always thinking 16th notes. I'm not. Is that pretty much what you were getting at?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like the things that you think about. I know for me, coming from, you know, the trombone kind of being my primary instrument for you know, most of my life, is that there's a lot of things that I don't even cognate as something to think about. But for me, you know, I try to keep it as simple as I can. That the trombone slide should arrive when one note starts without shortchanging the note it's leaving. So,
Mm.
you know, it's the same idea of, in essence, leave as late as possible. Um, and so for me, it's a, you know, it's arrive on time with, again, without without taking away from the note that you're playing already.
Hmm.
And then for me, as far as like the hand, I've never thought about, you know, pushing or pulling. For me, when the fingers are touching, they just move as a unit. And so I know early in my career, had a teacher that was a very wrist centric player, and like we were saying, there's a million ways to be successful, and that was extremely successful for him, and for a while it was successful for me also. But as I got to a place where I needed to be extremely precise, especially when I was, really heavy on the audition trail, um, and things of that nature, really digging into the orchestral repertoire. I found that I needed to reduce the number of variables as much as humanly possible
Mm.
so that I could control for everything. And that to me led to thinking about the way I hold the slide as it's just one contained unit. And when I move, they just all move together. And then I think of sort of active and passive uh, joints. So like the fingers and the wrist, to me, there's no active moving of the wrist. It's
Right.
just accommodating what happens with the big levers, which are my elbow and my shoulders, and scapula and all those things. Um, so that's kind of how I'm thinking of it, is that, from the sternoclavicular joint all the way down to the wrist, it's like this one big, mover.
Yeah.
Uh, and so yeah, I mean, as long as I arrive on time, and as long as I don't create tension anywhere that would impede the smooth nature of my airstream, I feel like I'm doing okay.
Yeah, it was about where you were talking about no tension here, and I'm really glad you said that. I might
Okay.
jump off of that when you're done.
Yeah, so we just had
You're
an
frozen.
internet
Yeah.
issue for anybody watching, but I was talking about how I think of the slide technique from, the sternoclavicular joint all the way down to the wrist as just one big thing. And as long as I'm arriving on time and I'm not creating any tension in the apparatus that is moving to slide, then I feel like I'm doing okay. As long as as long as it's smooth, it's well timed, and it's not impeding or creating turbulence in the airstream, then I think any way you think about it, any sort of methodology is probably going to wind up being successful if you follow those three
Mm.
sort of guided pillars.
Yeah, agreed. And I'm glad you talked about like the trying to get it done with as tensionless as possible. And I really like what you said, the active parts of the technique and the inactive parts or the passive parts of the
Mm-hmm.
technique. That's a great way to think about it. I haven't heard that before, but I'm definitely going to think about that going forward because I try and think of when I talk about my fingers, I try and feel that energy between the fingers, and that's very active. But if you're too active in the wrist, you're going to tend to lead from this point. And I see that a lot in students. They try and lead. They try and think of their fingers and their wrist almost as the like one joint, and they
Mm-hmm.
they they end up playing like that, and that introduces a lot of tension here, and it results in a very jerky way to move the slide. But if you go and read a lot of text on technique, you'll find all the various joints at play. There's a lot of good body mapping that you can do, and I would say you might disagree with me, but I would say most of that's passive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's
I mean,
I
I
think that's
think
a
the
great
idea
way.
with body mapping is that all of these systems kind of function together
Mm-hmm.
instead of one being overly active. And I know,
Mm-hmm.
for me, I know there are some really amazing players out there who are extremely wristy,
Mm-hmm.
and they're fantastic. And but for me, it was just one of those things that as I tried to be more precise, this being a primary mover became something that was more difficult to control. It was a variable that didn't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily make me faster, and it didn't make me more accurate. But if I mostly kept the wrist still, I was much
Mm-hmm.
more accurate. And I think studying with Ralph Sauer, who is probably got the best slide technique I've ever seen. It's perfectly precise, and so I kind of copied that a lot,
Yeah.
and so he's not an extremely wristy player, and
Mm.
again, like we were saying, as long as you don't have tension and turbulence in the airstream and you arrive on time, and it's replicable. If you can do it the same every time, then I guess you're on your way.
Yeah. Would you say you would approach the same speed regardless of what position you're moving to from what position, or do you not even think about it?
So I think that the speed is not something that is variable in terms of um, how fast you're going to get there if the two notes are connected. Now, if
Mm.
certainly if there's a short rest between them or a quarter note rest or something like that, I can afford to be I can afford to be sluggish. One of the things that Ralph Sauer did when I was studying with him was great. He's like, pretend there's a plexiglass shield between us, and he would soundproof shield, and he'd move his hand like really slow, and he's like, which one am I playing? And most people would say, we're playing legato. And he's like, no, I'm playing staccato, because if I'm playing legato, I can't afford to be soupy. I have to be extremely precise. And
Yeah.
so for me, I don't think about a variation in speed.
Mm.
Um, but even though I know that to some degree, if I'm trying to go from first position to fifth, I'm probably going to wind up leaving first position just a minute, you know, period of time earlier than I would otherwise. But again, that's another one of those things coming from being a trombonist my whole life, that I just, it's built
Yeah.
into my coordination. So
And at this point, I'm sure you're thinking mostly about what do I sound like rather than all of the semantics of slide technique. You're mostly concerned with how's it coming through on the bell.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I like that when we first started, you mentioned slide, lips, tongue, and air, because ultimately I can pretty much trace it down to one of those four things, or a combination of a few. And as long as it sounds the way I want, and I follow those things, then I usually don't try to get
Mm.
too much into the mechanics unless I absolutely have to, but I'm doing something that I shouldn't.
Yeah. A great practice to get into if you're trying to work on anything, any element of your technique. Uh, if you're trying something new, record yourself. Record yourself trying something new and really take an honest listen to how it comes through on the bell, because that's what really matters. If you got a funky slide grip or whatever and it still sounds amazing, then maybe it's working for you. Even if it's not textbook correct, it's everybody's different. Everyone's going to have a different approach to the horn. That's why we have so many varying opinions on slide technique. But it's all about how does it come through on the bell? What do you sound like? But
Yeah,
yeah,
cool. I and I think one of the things we got asked about a ton, and I I hate to say this, but I would have thought that we were trumpet players. The amount that we got asked about range,
yeah,
upper range and lower range. So I'll give our trombone friends a break. They did ask about low range too. Um, so cool. We can talk about developing range in both directions as well. So I'll let you uh, I'll let you go with that one if you want, Geoff. I know
sure.
Geoff has a fantastic upper register that gets used a lot in Presidio, because
Mm.
we ditched our horn players. So a lot of the times that we need that horn timbre, um, Geoff is covering that with the euphonium in the upper register, and then
Yeah.
some of our newer charts do well, like balance out our parts well, where one of the trombones might be sitting in the upper register and another one's in the meat register. But yeah, so go ahead.
Yeah.
Talk about how you develop range.
Well, at the risk of sounding arrogant, I've always been able to play high. It's just always been in my wheelhouse and my strengths. I've always just had this understanding of how to play in the extreme upper registers, even from high school. Didn't always understand what I was doing, and that actually, if I'm being honest, came back to bite me in the butt later when I was trying to refine that. When I was trying to refine that particular area of my range, and I had to come to grips with it's not all about squeeze and blow. There is like an airspeed that you need to be concerned with to make sure that you're really hitting the center of the pitch every time. And so in a lot of ways, when I go to teach upper register, I do feel like because I was able to do that already and I didn't go through that learning process, it's harder for me to teach upper register playing. So I have had to come up with my own techniques of refining my own playing in order to be able to teach that register. But what I found is it really, as tempting as it is to just tighten up all the time, it's all about the airspeed. It's all about making sure that when you are heading up, and again, I go back to scales. Practice your scales, be inching them up. I like to do 5-note slurred scales, and I really listen to my sound. And at this point, I'm trying to really be conscious of my airspeed. Does my air increase in speed every time the note goes higher? Right. And a lot of that you can get from how it sounds, really listening to the center of the pitch and making sure that the vibrations sound really alive and active and not too constricted. But that has been my primary focus when it comes to upper range playing. I feel like I am prepared to teach lower range playing much better because that's something that was an area of deficiency for me when I was learning, and it kind of still is, if I'm being brutally honest with everybody. I still am working on my low playing, especially on trombone. It's a little The euphonium can be very forgiving with inconsistencies in airflow, especially when it comes to pedal notes. You can get those notes very easily. As long you just Sometimes it feels like if you just blow enough air, the note shows up, right? But if on the trombone, that's not always the case. It has to have the right speed, and it has to have the right kind of setup. A lot of people get their first pedal note out by dropping the jaw and just blowing enough air so that it shows up, right? But that can sometimes prove to be so unlike the rest of your range that you've been refining. When it comes time to unify those two levels, those two registers, it you're not prepared to make that jump with your jaw in a clean way sometimes. So honestly, my bread and butter for this has been the Lip Slur book by Brad Edwards. He's got a lot of great slow lip slurs that will gradually work your range downwards. So I've made slow lip slur number 46 a part of my daily routine because it takes me all the way down to the bottom register of the trombone, and it forces you to connect that range with your comfortable range in the staff. So that's what I've been working on a lot lately. A tuba player told me once, and I use this as a visual on a regular basis. As you go lower, the targets actually get much smaller, and it becomes all the more important that you're aiming properly in the mouthpiece, and then you provide it with enough air to let the horn vibrate the way it's supposed to. But the targets are very, very small. So that's been my primary focus when it comes to playing in the extremities. With the upper range, I am very much concerned with speed, and I think in the lower range, I'm mostly concerned with quantity and direction. Josh, what do you think about what's your approach to range building?
Well, I'm kind of like you in that the upper register was always a very natural thing for me, and it it started because I still remember this very clearly in sixth grade. Michael Smith could play an F above the staff, and I couldn't. And I was not about that life. And so I went and figured it out. So thank you, Michael, if you're out there. But I did when I was very young. I was in ninth grade or eighth grade. I heard a recording of Dave Steinmeier with the Airmen of Note. and he
Mm.
played this over the rainbow chart, and it ended on a double high B flat. And I, at that point, was obsessed. I was like, I'm going to learn to do that. So from the time I was in ninth grade, I could play a double B flat, but along with that, I had this obsession with lip slurs and with flexibility studies. And I
Mm.
still do. It's still something that I used to just sit around for 45 minutes just playing slurs. And so my approach now is that being being facile, being strong in the upper register is not necessarily about strength. It's about coordination of the fine motion of the lips. And so the way for me is like the back door to range is lip slurs. It's being able to you know when you want the air to do a certain thing, you want to make a micro adjustment that you're able to do that. You have that control over the lips. And to me, that's built you know, through slurs, through lip slurs, especially ones that sit, middle B flat and above, just easily moving between them. And so that's sort of how I, looking back, can say that I kind of wound up developing that. Now, these days, it's more about I'll play my Bordonis up an octave or in tenor clef and things like that, just to keep a certain level of fluidity, intonation, control, and things like that. But I know, especially for younger players, it's like instead of thinking of developing my upper register, like develop flexibility, develop prowess and control over lip slurs as we call them, and that will lead to faster gains as you are studying the range. Uh, at least in my opinion, that's kind of how I think about it. Now, the low range, a lot like you, I didn't even think about it. To me, it wasn't impressive to be able to play low. It wasn't cool to be able to play low until I got much older. And that honestly didn't start until I started studying with Sam Palafian and was kind of introduced to this law of accommodation that anything which is difficult, if practiced, will become easier. So, we're doing these, smooth air movement in warm up class every day. And it's just like day after day after day after day, I am tackling smooth air, the way I handle my air, and I'm doing it every single day. And it was really then that I really started to feel like I had control in the lower register, other than just like, yeah, I can play a pedal F, but can I get to pedal F from anywhere I want to, and is pedal F in tune, and is all those kinds of things. So I think, yeah, much like you, the low register is where I had to spend my time, and it was just through systematic, taking an exercise and just always doing it, not letting myself only focus on the things that I'm already good at, but really embracing. I know Jeremy Wilson at Vanderbilt has talked about like hugging the cactus or whatever, and it's exactly what it was. It was like, I'm not great at the low register, and I don't like that, so I'm gonna go tackle it, systematically.
I think you bring up a lot of good points, especially when it's like, when it's a range you're not comfortable with, you just kind of have to bite the bullet and work it, work it down, live down there for a little bit. The old adage, I guess it's not an adage, but the old advice, play your Bordonis in a fifth down, an octave down. That really holds up. It's the idea, can you make it sound as nice in your lower register as you can in your mid register, especially when you're working on low notes.
I know one thing that
But yeah.
I see a lot, and I try to focus on now with students, is that we don't develop special settings, like, oh, I can get
Mm.
this low note if I drop my jaw way down here. And I took some lessons with Doug Elliott, and he is kind of the inheritor of Donald Reinhardt's The Pivot System, which kind of gets a bad rap, but it is something that totally changed my playing because I went from being someone with an obsession with lip slurs and a huge number of shifts. My mouthpiece was all over the place,
Mm.
and to really sitting down and sounding bad for a while, but doing what Doug told me to do, and eventually I got to where I don't really have any shifts, and I
Right.
can go from my lowest notes to my highest notes without any kind of weird, anything happening. And so I
Yeah.
think as long as when you're developing range, I don't think there's any bad things as long as you're staying relaxed, as long as you're not developing anything that sits well outside of your normal comfortable setting,
Mm-hmm.
and as long as you're firm, as long even in the low register. I mean, in the super super low register, I understand, but like in most of your low register stuff, we should still have an embouchure. And
Yeah.
I think I think we're all looking for like a pill, but anytime you talk about to
Cookies.
anybody who's really talking about developing the upper register, there's no pill, there's no like secret thing. It's just like, you know. And
Yeah.
one of the things, I mean, this is totally off topic, but I feel very fortunate is that Google and things like that did not exist when I picked up the trombone.
Right.
And I couldn't go to the internet and I couldn't go to YouTube and expect someone to tell me how to do it. It was
Right.
like,
Right.
oh, you want to have a good upper register? Well, go practice your upper register, you know?
Right.
So,
Right.
cool.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I know I've watched a lot of Toby Off's videos, and he talks about the diamond, the just below the nose to the corner to the chin to the corner, and this anything outside that diamond should be pretty stable, and anything
Mhm.
in the diamond should be prepared to be flexible. So I know when I was studying with Brian Bowman, he was doing we did a lot with a mouthpiece visualizer for the first semester of my lessons with him because he was trying to calm down all of this unnecessary movement that I was doing so that I was only moving the muscles that really needed to be moved. Anything inside the cup does the majority of the work. Now, that's not to say that if you have sympathetic movement outside of that area, it's a huge problem. All, of course, just as long as, like Josh said, as long as it's relaxed and it sounds good, then you're probably doing all right. But it is a great exercise in terms of being able to focus your efforts into the set of muscles that's actually doing the job.
Oh yeah. So you talked about a mouthpiece visualizer. I'm gonna totally go off the rails here, and
Yeah, do it.
I'll edit something in to whatever. But you talked about a mouthpiece visualizer. So let's talk about buzzing because that's like a hot topic. It's still a hot topic. There's still people that want to get in debates um, on the merits and relative benefits of mouthpiece buzzing. But where do you stand on it?
I I feel weird when I start a practice session without it, and that's not to say it's a crutch for me. It's been a huge part of my development ever since I started getting serious about this. I buzzed when I was in middle school, and then I kind of got away from it in high school, and then I didn't buzz really all through undergrad, and then I started to notice there were certain things I couldn't do. I couldn't unify my tone color. My lower range, my mid range, my upper range all kind of had different colors to them. Even note by note, it didn't have a unified sound to it. And that was a comment I was getting regularly in competitions and in spot lessons with people. Um, and my approach to flexibility, I was a hard time advancing in that, intonation, even breath support. And once I started my graduate degree, and again, Brian Bowman was the one who really, he was like, why don't you buzz? Why did you stop doing that? And I was like, because I thought it was this thing that only like little kids did. And so I got back into it, and I immediately, within the first month, started to see huge jumps in all those areas. I was able to play with a more even sound. I was able to make my breaths more, I was able to make my phrases, basically. I saw an improvement in my intonation, in my flexibility, and a lot of that is attributed to just really focusing on what's happening right here. You know, it can be great exercise. It can be a great focusing tool. Really, the idea is, and this is, I think, in the Kleinhammer book, the art of trombone playing. Your lips need to produce the pitch, and then your horns prepared to accept that pitch and vibrate with that pitch, right? And that's something I wasn't doing. I was just kind of like throwing air at my embouchure and expecting my horn to vibrate accordingly. And it wasn't an agreement of frequency. And that's when I really started to see a jump in my development, is when I really took my mouthpiece practicing seriously. So I'm a believer. I will buzz every day. It will be the thing that I do right after I do my breathing practice. I will take it to the mouthpiece. And I have a 1-year-old. I found it's a great thing. I can get that done while I chase my 1-year-old around the house and try and keep him away from, you know, our Roomba and out of the kitchen when
Yeah, yeah,
when breakfast is being cooked. You know, this is something that I can get done first thing in the morning, but it really does start my day off.
yeah.
So to answer your
Yeah, I mean,
question simply, I'm a
yeah,
believer.
I'm right there with you. I know some fantastic players that don't buzz at all, and but I know for me that it's not that I have to buzz to be able to play, but
Sure.
I sure feel better about like ease of production and things like that when I do it. And I always talk about, I think that buzzing sort of exists on it exists on a continuum, and over here you have like, you know people who buzz so much that the mouthpiece is an instrument all by itself,
Mm,
and then you have over here where the mouthpiece never leaves the instrument. It's like, you know
mm,
they're one thing, and I try to exist somewhere right in the middle where I'm not just trying to be good at the mouthpiece, because nobody's ever going to be like, hey, go out there and play the song on your mouthpiece. But um, so I try to exist in the middle of that continuum where if I find myself doing something that I don't think can translate into playing, then I dial it back and I'm like, okay, I'm just trying to get good at the mouthpiece now, and not at using the mouthpiece buzzing as a tool to get better at my instrument. So, but
mhm.
I spend a huge amount of time buzzing, and I feel better for it,
Yeah.
as long as I'm doing it the right way, as long as I
Yeah.
don't have any tension. And for me now, it started as making sure that I'm buzzing the right notes, but
Mhm.
now it's more like a diagnostic tool. Am I relaxed? Am I flowing freely through pitches?
Mhm.
Stuff like that. So, and sometimes I use a tube on the end of the mouthpiece. Ralph Sauer called it a forced air resistance tube. So
I've got mine.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. If you have a removable lead pipe, you have a fart. I mean, a forced air resistance tube. So, I'll do that,
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
and especially if I'm buzzing in the lower register, just to try to keep the freedom and not do anything at the lips that I feel is compensating for a lack of physics behind the mouthpiece. So cool. Well, I know we've been talking for a while, so there's a few questions from band directors that I know we wanted to get at. So let's jump into those real quick. Um,
Yeah.
we got one. I'm going to pull it up right here. That's and I love this one because it was, how do you how do you get beginners to use more air without making gross sounds, or without getting that, like, harsh sound?
Yeah.
Um, and that was something that on tour, we do an incredible number of clinics, and I feel like we, in some shape, manner, or form, get asked this all the time. Like, can you talk to them about using more air? And sometimes it's like, we can you you know, and it's a constant thing. But I always feel like we talk about quantity a lot as music educators, but we don't delve into quality enough.
Yeah.
And you can use a huge amount of air in a very muscular, a very uh, aggressive manner, and that's when you get that aggressive sound. But you can also use a lot of air in a very relaxed manner. And
Mm.
so I think, you know, for the band directors out there struggling with the same thing, it's use a lot of air, but you got to come at the quality of air, and that means from like the very beginning, breathing in for 4 counts and breathing out for 4 counts, and breathing in for two and out for two and in for two and out for four, and getting them used to using a lot of air, but having some sense of a smooth release and an effortless inhale and an effortless release of the air column.
Yeah.
You think, Geoff?
Oh, I think you nailed it. We're mostly concerned, at least in my experience, with the inhale, and there's not a lot of attention sometimes put onto the exhale or the direction of the air, the way that you can control how the air leaves you. And how the air enters you is important, right? Because you want to be relaxed. And if you can take an even 4 count breath in that fills you, then theoretically you can condense that into 1 beat, or you can condense that into half a beat, right? But the tricky part comes with figuring out um, how to control both the speed and the quality of how the air leaves you. So yeah, I think that that's an excellent point. I've watched this guy teach breathing in clinics across America, and he's always gives great information. And honestly, I'm sorry, I'm gonna puff you up a little more, Josh. I didn't really pay a lot of attention to my breathing until I watched this guy teach. And I started to watch the exercises that you were doing, and yeah, now it's a daily part of my sessions, mostly because of the lessons I've learned just being on the road. Um,
Cool.
yeah.
Well, why don't we wrap it up with probably the most important question that we got, and we got this one a lot. What kind of mouthpiece are you playing?
I am playing on a Griego 4M right now. I was on a 5G for a while, and I admittedly wasn't much of a gearhead um, growing up. I very, I guess you might say I pridefully was trying to get certain things done on the mouthpiece that I had. Probably because I was feeling a little cheap and didn't want to drop the money on a mouthpiece. Because buying a mouthpiece can be incredibly stressful when when you're not rolling in the dough. Sometimes they're expensive. You have to do a lot of research when you're getting ready to buy one. If there's
Yeah,
no conference nearby where you can test 5 or 6 mouthpieces back to back, it can be very hard to buy a mouthpiece with confidence. And then, sometimes you really don't know if it's working for you until a week after you've had it, maybe even longer. And then by then, good luck if they'll take it back.
yeah,
So it can be very hard. So oftentimes you're really left to the resources that you have. If you have people in the know, teachers, private instructors, great players around you can offer advice or can give you the ins and outs of how to buy a mouthpiece or what maybe to test or what might be best for you. Use those resources. That's my best piece of advice. Um, I would say, I mean, Josh helped me pick out this one. I talked to Josh at length about mouthpieces. This is an area where he's very proficient in. He's very knowledgeable about equipment and things like that. So I was able to use that resource to my advantage. But for the most part, when you're dealing with especially high school students, there's going to be some tried and true mouthpiece sizes that you're going to probably want to gravitate towards. If you're teaching high school, For trombone, a 5 or a 4 is probably going to be good. That's probably going to be good. Josh may have some different opinions on this, but I know that as a teacher, I get frustrated when I'm teaching an 11th grader who's still playing on a 12C, and he doesn't know why he can't play with a round full tone. And I'm like, because you're playing on a dinky mouthpiece. That's why. You're not able to let your lips vibrate with the kind of with the kind of amplitude that they need. They're not able to vibrate quite to the rate that will create that full tone that you're looking for. So you might want to think about upgrading on that. But Josh, what do you think about all this? Let me get
Yeah,
your.
so I mean, I definitely took the opposite path in life, and that is that I started as a total gear junkie, and then over time have been like, I mean, does it have a rim, or whatever. But I think for beginners, I don't even like beginners starting on a 12C,
Right.
because it's a specialist mouthpiece and they grow out of it so fast. I mean, you know, so I think starting beginners on a 7C is best, and
Mm,
then that way, if you do have a student who just like is never going to change anything about their equipment, they're not going to be in 10th grade playing a 12C. At least they'll be in 10th grade playing a 7C. A simple, a mild adjustment better. Um,
mhm.
but I do. I think that when they get into high school, they need to be at least playing a 6.5 AL. If you get a
Mhm.
student that is serious about playing, then a 5G. And if they even go a step beyond and they're like, I feel like I want something bigger, then fine, get a 4G and call it a day. And
Yeah.
everything that I experimented with as a young kid kind of fell in that category,
Mm.
until I started taking lessons with Doug Elliott. And that I still play a Doug Elliott, and I've actually kind of told him this. I feel like I grew up on those mouthpieces. Like that's how I where his mouthpieces are were my formative years. I started playing one when I was in ninth grade,
Yeah.
and so I've played everything under the sun, and I play a kind of a strange setup. I play like a 1.5G rim on a 5G cup, and so
Huh.
I play a huge rim on a pretty normal cup. And when I'm touring around with Presidio for Doug Elliott numbers, I play a 106 rim with an F cup, which is basically like a 1.5G rim on a 5G-ish size cup, and that's what works for me to be able to play the shows that we play, and sometimes more than one in a day and things like that. I have to have a slightly shallower mouthpiece
Yeah.
to be able to get all that accomplished. But like right now when I'm at home, I play a G cup and the same rim, and it's just a little bit bigger cup. And I yeah, I mean I think you it's kind of like you find out what your shoe size is in the rim, and then after that it's whatever. And for me, that huge rim is what I need.
Yeah.
It allows me to not have a lot of motion with the rim. It just kind of sits there, and but I realize that it's a huge rim, so not everybody's gonna want to do that. But unfortunately, I always have to stay in shape too.
Mhm.
I can't like take a couple of weeks off or whatever and
Right.
just come back. But yeah, so that's kind of my thing with mouthpieces is like
Yeah.
find out what size ish works for you, and then you can mess around with components after that. I always kind of tell people like mess with one component at a time before messing with something else. Like
Mhm.
if you're like, oh, my rim feels too small, well, don't go out and get a mouthpiece that's got a bigger rim and a bigger cup and a large throat, and because then if it doesn't work, you don't know which element doesn't work for you. And sometimes, and then most definitely, don't go from that mouthpiece to another mouthpiece. Go back to your mouthpiece you were playing before, because I know several times actually in my studies when I was messing around with mouthpieces, I would get to a place where nothing felt good
Yeah.
because I had jumped from what I knew to something new, and then jumped from something
Mhm.
new to something else. and that didn't feel good, but neither did, and so my face was like all kinds of like confused. And so at any rate, that's the, the 6.5 AL 5G 4G start on a 7C is my recommendation for young players.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
All right, man. Well, uh, thank you for trombone talk.
Yeah, man.
Um,
It was fun.
and if there are any other questions, then people are free to find us at our website.
Yeah.
Obviously on our Facebook page, YouTube, um, Twitter. Where else are we? Is that it? I think that's it.
Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter. Yeah.
Cool. All right.
This is what we love to do. We love to talk about this kind of stuff. So if you ever have any questions, just drop us a line.
Yeah. All right.
Cool.
Thank you all.
Thanks.